In this, the second film in a series of 3, Peter and Elfrieda Dyck tell the story of the first transport of Mennonite refugees from Europe to Paraguay, South America, after World War II. In the first film, Berlin Exodus, Peter spoke of how these refugees were miraculously delivered from the Russian zone in Germany. Every door seemed closed until Marshal Sokolovsky, the Russian military commander in Berlin, signed the order allowing the Mennonites in Berlin to go through the Russian zone. This second film shows the refugees' lives in Berlin and the journey to their new home in Paraguay. Paraguay was not unfamiliar to the Mennonites. Nearly 25 years earlier, another group of Mennonites had left Russia and resettled there. This story, as told by Peter and Elfrieda, is a personal one. Yet it involved many people in one of the most dramatic chapters of Mennonite Central Committee's history. Peter and Elfrieda Dyck have served with Mennonite Central Committee for more than 30 years. Here is their story of the first transport of Mennonite refugees.
And we hope that you will enjoy the film that we're going to show you now.
You all know the MCC logo, don't you? Here it is on the cap. The cross of Jesus, the bird represents the Holy Spirit or peace, and the interesting part is that here the cross is in motion, the cross representing the church moving forward. That is very unique, and let's put it on, Peter, like this. Good.
And now we want to take you back about 40 years. This was the MCC logo then.
And MCC used that logo to make a patch. The patch that all of us overseas workers wore on our left sleeve all the time. You like that, Peter? Take it. And we had it on our coats, on our jackets, on our shirts, never without that patch.
The story that we're going to share with you now is a refugee story. Many of you are acquainted with the events of World War II, and some of you may have read parts of this story in Henry's Red Sea.
This is where the story began, in Germany. I've divided it the way the victorious Allies divided Germany after the war, 1945, into 4 parts, and they called each part a zone. This was the British zone, the French zone, the American zone, and the Russian zone. And in the heart of the Russian zone was the city of Berlin.
And you may also remember that these refugees were Mennonites from Russia. And so the question has often been asked
whether they were Russians or whether they were Germans, because they were born in Russia, but they left Russia and went to Germany.
But originally, most of them came from Holland. Our ancestors were Dutch. But during the 16th century, they were being persecuted and then fled from Holland to Prussia, which is Poland today. And later, they went to Russia.
Alma, you were born in Russia too, weren't you?
Yes, Debbie. Both Peter and I were born in Russia, just like these refugees. But the difference was that we left Russia as children after World War I. And these people left Russia as refugees during World War II. And it's their story that we want to share with you.
Share with you and with the larger church, the Mennonite and the Brethren in Christ Church.
For those of us in overseas refugee service, it was very encouraging to experience the support of our churches here at home.
Mm-hmm.
It was really you and your parents and your grandparents that made all this possible. You and the Lord.
Elfrieda, I like the way you say that, you and the Lord, because if it hadn't been for the Lord, we couldn't have done it. And that is why we have given the title to this film, Gott Kann. God can. God is able. It was your brother, Cornelius, we always called him C.F. Clausen, who is the MCC director in Europe, who often used that expression. Frequently he said, Gott kann. Let me tell you about C.F. Clausen. He was a Mennonite statesman. We don't have very many, seldom. A statesman, that is, he was a man who went negotiating with high government officials in Moscow, in Washington, in Ottawa, in London. And when he walked into the office of the United Nations in Geneva, Switzerland, word very quickly got around, C.F. Clausen is here. And then he went with the refugees in the camps and in their lonely places where they were scattered in Germany, and he'd sit with them in the most humble and degrading situations often, and he'd encourage them and give them information, and they thought everything was so hopeless. And then he'd pretty soon reach into his pocket and pull out his New Testament. That was so characteristic. And then he'd read to them from the Word and encourage them. Then he'd pray with them. And before he left, he shook their hand, looked them straight in the eye, and I've heard him say that many times. He said, please don't forget, Gott Kann. God can.
As Jesus said to his disciples, with men it is impossible, but with God all things are possible.
When the Mennonite refugees from Russia came to Berlin, this is what they saw. A once beautiful and proud city lying in ruins. Many thousands of civilians, men, women, and children, they buried under these ruins. Clearing the rubble of the streets is hard work, but the women had to do it because so many of the men were killed, or perhaps still prisoners of war. Are they looking for possessions, some heirloom, some treasure, or perhaps a lost child? Germany was in shambles. Air raid shelters like this one cost an enormous amount of money, but they couldn't save the people. Shelters like these survived, but the people, now they're out gleaning in the fields, looking for an individual ear of grain like Ruth did in the fields of Boaz long ago. And if that wasn't enough, these refugees, a Mennonite woman from South Russia walking the street of Berlin, 135 of them we found, huddled together in these bombed buildings. What a day. What a disaster. And what a joy, too, to make contact with them and find them. And our first concern was find housing for them and find food. They had to have food. And what a complicated lifeline that was to get the bread from the United States and Canada via Holland and the Red Cross to Berlin. Here they come. Dutch ambulances actually bringing flour and beans from America via Holland to Berlin. Elfrieda, she's always got a little candy. Watch this, careful. There, he's going to take two. Everybody just one, please. One. There's only one for each. He did it, didn't he? There's one in every group, I suppose. Life goes on. It has to go on. Children are born, and they call this little baby Elfrieda. Some women have even brought their spinning wheels. It's not all that much use anymore, but it is something of the past, and the future is so uncertain. And so in Berlin, for a little while, they had a little wool, and they demonstrated. And we started church life again. These people had not been in church for so long. And we found a bombed-out school where the gym was still usable. And here we walked down the street to that bombed-out school where we met regularly for worship services. We even organized a church council with the Mennonite Brethren and the church Mennonites joined together as if we were one group and belonged together as we do in the Lord and our heritage. And C.F. Clausen visited us only once in Berlin. On the left, you will see him, the MCC refugee director at the time. But we also had funerals. The great reaper was not absent. The old and the young couldn't take it. It was too much for them. And how often I heard when the choir had sung and the tears were rolling, and then someone would say, now she's no longer a refugee. The next day we buried the child. The day before it was the mother. There is grief. There is sorrow. And there is always hope. Hope, the only hope we could ultimately give them of the resurrection, even the child in an unmarked grave. But we had lots of children, hundreds of children, and school had to go on. We had no blackboard, no chalk, no pencils, no paper, no books, but we had to have school. You know, these Mennonites from Russia put a high premium on education. That is clear. Yes, life does go on. What a joy to have a wedding in a refugee camp. When everything is dismal, you would think, and then young people fall in love, and they say yes to each other, and they mean it, and it's for life. But always we are thinking of the Russian zone. How are we going to get through the Red Sea? The sign says you're leaving the American sector, but of course that's only the sign. We couldn't leave. We were there for 9 months, and the camp grew to over 1,000 people. And then we prayed. Oh, how we prayed. And then one night actually, God opened the door, and we went through 45 boxcars, and we landed in Bremerhaven, and the good ship Volendam was waiting for us. There's the train on which we came, a cattle train or a freight train, and the people are waiting for the signal to be unloaded. We take the sick first because Paraguay will take everybody, and then the others come too, the men, women, and the children. What a happy day. What a glorious day to think life is going to start over again in Paraguay. They don't know too much about it. We have told them, yes, but most of it is hope and dream, and of course a strong faith that Gott Kann, God is able. He's going to see us through as he has seen us through the Russian zone. And now let's board this ship in hope and in faith. And as they come on board, although it's cold outside, they're warmed, immediately receive a hot cup of cocoa, and before long that train is empty. They look in to make sure nobody left behind, and the ship is full, and we're ready to go, almost ready. And looking down, we see C.F. Clausen. It's so cold he's got a blanket over his coat, and they wave goodbye. This is indeed a historic moment. The first ship with that many refugees, 2,303, to leave Europe after the war. Before anyone else, the United Nations or governments or other organizations had moved them, we were off with these people to South America. And soon we came to the equator, and it got warm, and we're assembled for evening devotions, and the choirs singing. And in a way, one might say this, 21 days on the ship were all days of devotion, were days of thanksgiving. It wasn't, of course, always just preaching, singing, and hearing the choir. There were many other things, such as lifeboat drill, of course. Everybody on board, come on, put your life jacket on, everybody. I mean, everybody. Look at him. Now, here comes the first officer. That's the inspection now. Let's hope the vests, the life jackets are not front to back, and they're all buckled up. Oh, he thinks that's a funny jacket I've got there. Oh, my, oh, my. And now, how would you like to meet the captain of the ship? A fine Dutch gentleman. Von Vlietstra was his name. He's walking towards us again. You'll see him with the first officer, the captain in the center. And let me also introduce you to the medical staff. Most of these are our own refugee nurses. And when we thought everything was under control, happy days ahead, the alarm sounded, man overboard, and they lower the lifeboat in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And watch carefully now, they're going to have another accident. This boat isn't held properly, and the men fall out. They hang on the ropes. They fall in the water. They have severe rope burns. Later on, they're in the hospital. It was a bad accident, the second one. And then the rumor, who's overboard? Some said a child. Some said, no, an old man. Turned out it was a 16-year-old girl, and she didn't want to commit suicide at all. She was an excellent swimmer. In fact, she swam for half an hour. Look at that boat, the lifeboat. They're bailing out water. And if you look carefully in the front, you can see her lying there, unconscious. She had been swimming to the last moment, and they brought her on board. Here's Dr. Van Loon, ready to receive her as they bring her on board. And then no sooner is she safely in the ship's hospital than it's full steam ahead. And all these children by the railing, it did give us concerns. Well, there were more surprises, happy surprises too, and the people all stood around and watched, 2,000 of them. What in the world is this, they said. This is not our freight. These are not our boxes. What are they doing in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean? Oh, we had planned this carefully. And those of you who are seeing this film recognize these are the bales of clothing that MCC sends overseas. And we had put hundreds of them on the boat because these people had nothing in the refugee camps. And for years they had not been able to replenish their wardrobe. And so here on the high seas, we had a good old-fashioned, you might say, clothing distribution. Of course, the sign Im Namen Christi, in the name of Christ, from MCC, has to be there, and other signs hanging, Decken, Laken, and so on, blankets and sheets, and the refugee women, of course, and the men too, are the ones that help us in the distribution. What a joy. See the little label on the shirt on the left? That's the orange sticker. It says in the name of Christ on each garment that we hand out. In fact, on this trip, if I'm not mistaken, we handed out over 35,000 pieces of clothing and shoes. Oh, the shoe department is always a bottleneck. Somebody thoughtfully put in a toy. And one day, Elfrieda called the children, just children. What a novel idea that was. Without the parents, just children, how happy they were to receive the things that they longed for. Well, so life goes on, and you get used to it very quickly. Although 21 days seems a long time, they think, let's play shuffleboard. But already we're in Buenos Aires, and the harbor pilot is coming to take the boat into pier, into the port. And there, Peter Dyck, what are you up to? Up to is right. If you don't watch it, you're going to be minus your pants up there. But if you had sat where I sit and had looked through, you would have seen how Elfrieda is coming out of a tent. Tent, you say? Yes, about 50 tents. And all these 2,300 people were living in tents now because we can't all go up to Paraguay at once. There are not boats to take us. And unfortunately, something terrible has happened in the meantime. A revolution broke out in Paraguay, so we're detained. And notice the first thing that we do in our tent camp. School, of course. Did I say in Berlin already? They put a high premium on education. And here's the third class. Sometimes it meets outside, and sometimes inside the tent, depending on the time of day and the heat. But school has to go on. And the schuster, the cobbler, the shoemakers, just like the children of Israel in the desert wore out their shoes, ours got worn out too. And so one day they said, couldn't we get some supplies? And we did. And then these fellows got a new idea. Look at that. The first one drew the pattern. The second one cuts it out. It's an assembly line on the belt system. Look at that. The third one rasps the edges even. The fourth one makes a little hole there for the big toe, and he hands it to the fifth one, who will, of course, make the little niches so he can put the straps on there. And these straps were made by the women. If you think this is all just a show for the picture, you're mistaken. Even before breakfast, this is what they produced. Look at that, and the demand was always greater than the supply. Women embroider, der die behütet schläft nicht. And everyone was allowed to mail one letter a day. MCC would pay the postage. People wanted to know what's going on in the world, so we bought a newspaper for them, the daily press, so to say. And others would sit around in camp, making music, singing, passing away the time. It was difficult, really, quite difficult. After all, a day or two or a week or two is possible, but 3 months, that's a long time. For the children, for the young people, for the mothers. This is little Elfrieda that was born in Berlin. Nothing to do. Wait. Play chess and wait. The women are busy, of course. They have to keep the family clean, the laundry. And so finally, after the days and the weeks went on, we laid on pipes and brought water to the camp. Saturday afternoon shower. And again, Elfrieda wants to do something for the children, and we had at least a birthday a day or more, and we managed to get some sweets, some candy, and you know what a candy scramble is like. Children love that when the candies are wrapped. And this young fellow is now a Mennonite minister in the Choco of Paraguay. The large girl is deaf and mute. There's little Elfrieda. Well, I would say, fellows, don't get discouraged. You got to peel 10 bags of potatoes every day, at least 10 bags. And then the bell rings. And when the bell goes, 1,000 people will go across the street to eat. It's the only time we're allowed to leave the camp. And then you notice how the cars have to stop in the street. The police are there to stop them. And now we're marching into this large immigration hall where our MCC girls have gotten the lunch ready. As you see, it's substantial, but very simple. some kind of a milk soup, and a rather sizable piece of bread. And when they march in, then they always sang before they sat down to eat. And the Argentinians would come in to listen to that. They loved to hear these people sing, and they could sing well. And the acoustic was marvelous. And now, of course, about 1,000 spoons are busy. And in the next shift, the other 1,000 will come and have lunch here. We were fortunate that we had no major accident, but we did have a first aid tent where we could take care of the minor injuries. On Sundays, of course, we gathered for worship. The only place was outside, naturally. And on this occasion, we had a special visitor visit us from North America. Wonder who recognizes him. This was, for 32 years, the chairman of MCC, none other than P.C. Hebert from Hillsborough, Kansas. The choir, of course, sings on every occasion. Shukovskoy is the director. It's wonderful. Very wonderful, the worship. And then commitments were made to Christ, and Brother Planer joined us in baptizing these people. And that was not peer pressure. As you see, they're not teens. Many of these people are married, have their own children already, and they know what they're doing. It's a real commitment to start over again, not only in agriculture, but in other ways, but also in their spiritual life. And then Brother Lowen conducted the Mennonite Brethren, where the baptism is by immersion, of course. And after the baptism, there is the communion with the bread and the cup. But again, as we look into the camp life, it's difficult how to pass the time. So we got a volleyball and a net, and so the young fellows could at least knock it around and get rid of some of their energy. And then all of a sudden, something happened we hadn't even thought of. Rain. It actually rained. Look at that. It's rather sensible, isn't it? They dip it out, carry it away. That is, some of it is sensible. As I walked through the camp that morning, I saw all kinds of scenes like this one. That's not very sensible. Just throw it to the next tent. But what are they going to do? Indeed, the children have no problem. They're going to play boat. But these people, look, they've put their baggage on top of their cots. If you doubt that we're of Dutch origin, look at them building dikes. Instinctively, we gravitate towards that. And it was necessary, too, because a few weeks later, then we had this rain. Ooh, it came so heavy, so heavy. We just picked up our tents and our belongings and moved to higher ground. It's the only thing possible. No use building a few little dikes or bailing it out with a bucket. We moved. And then the happy news came. The revolution in Paraguay is over, and we can go on. And, of course, here we hand out to each family a pot, a spoon, plate, knife and fork, so that they have some of their own equipment when they get to Paraguay. Indeed, it's already moving day again. We have chartered some buses, a truck to take the baggage, and, of course, this group will go up by river boat. We only sent one group by train. That didn't work out too well, and so after that, we always used boats, and one of them particularly was our favorite, the Ciudad de Concepcion. And while these people are now journeying up the river, about 300 or so on one boat, let's go to Paraguay and meet them there. And what a surprise that was for them. The Paraguayan market, bananas galore. They hadn't seen bananas in Russia. And why did the people, especially the women, of course, why did they carry on their heads, they always wondered. And they ride side saddle. Only girls and women. Men never rode on donkeys. And these big-wheeled contraptions and all these oxen, and they're pulling a log, all that for one log. What a way to do it. They'd never seen anything like this in Russia or in Europe before. Well, now, once more we have to stop and pitch camp, so to say, and that's at San Lorenzo, just outside of the city of Asunción. And the reason for this is they're at the end of the trail. This is now where they're going to settle, and now they must decide who's going to be their neighbor. In fact, they have to also elect their mayor, and they have to pick the land. Oh, it's a big job now, and this is no longer MCC doing it for them. This is now your decision. You'll notice that this kitchen is very primitive. Indeed primitive. Here comes the running water. It's not like in Argentina when we had that beautiful big immigration hall. And what potatoes, they said. Potatoes? These aren't even potatoes. And somebody said they're mandioca. They'd never seen anything like it, and how would they live eating mandioca? Well, they did. And everybody is busy again, pitching in. Some bring the wood, some stoke the fires, and some stir the pots. And then the bell has to be rung. It's lunchtime. Notice that they all bring their own containers now, which we gave to them when they left Buenos Aires. Here they stand outside. They receive their bread and eat it wherever they can. We wanted to see Mennonites there 25 years of pioneering. We came on a day there was a wedding, and what surprised us, the parents and grandparents of bride and groom were both living. We hadn't seen that among the refugees for so long, because the families among them are all torn up and separated. They showed us the mental hospital behind this bottle tree, and then they took us to see the hospital. What a beautiful place already. All this, we kept marveling, all this in 25 years. This is the nurse's residence. We must see that too. Elfrieda is a nurse, of course. She wants to see everything, and so do I. And now a school building. The teachers and the students. It's a very windy day. There's a lot of sand in the air. This is the chief administration building, the only two-story building in the whole colony. This is the mayor. And the mayor then takes us around. He wants to see us, the secondary school building. The reason he showed us this is because they're building with bricks. Real bricks, as you see them here. No longer mud. And that took 25 years. Walking with the mayor and the school principal, we visit farms. We're impressed with the chickens, the ducks, the geese, and the horses. Lovely harness. And the wagons. They'd made them all themselves, everything as they remembered it, you might say, in their head. A Russian model. It's not a Paraguayan at all, and this is the farmer wagon and machine to clean the grain with. It's progress, and around every farm they had the citrus fruits, oranges, lemons, grapefruit, and of course a lot of bananas, which grow rather prolifically there. Their cash crop, however, is not fruit, is cotton. It's loosely packed, and they dump it on the ground floor with this pipe. They suck it up to the second floor, and there they have a contraption. I suppose what it does is it removes the seeds from the cotton, and then they push it into a baler. It's all primitive, and yet I was amazed when the bale came out. It was solid and firm and banded. They gave it a number, and the weight was on it. Unfortunately, they have to ship it all the way back to Europe for processing into cotton. They haven't got the facilities themselves yet. This is the seed, and they will press that and extract the oil. The only motor vehicle in the colony at that time was this one Ford truck. A typical street, the fence on both sides, nice houses. Water is very scarce, so this hand washer, a rukomoinik, a plunger goes up and just gives you a handful. But the cattle are nothing to boast about. I've seen better cows than these skinny, long-horned stuff. They have to do a lot of crossbreeding before they upgrade the cattle. And there we come, with a wagon, going through the Choco from one village to another. See how they fare after 25 years. This is a typical landscape in the Choco. The open prairie, bitter grass, and the short trees in the back, a bush, and that's where the refugees will settle. The villages are always in the bush. But it's hard work. We're back again now to the refugees that we took there. They've just arrived. The women have lost their husbands. They have to dig a well first to get the water, and then the mud lifted up, and 3 more bricks are ready. Mud bricks. Dobie turned them over to the sun to dry, just like the ants. If the ants can do it, they say, then we can do it too. And now they've finished their home. The door is primitive, yes, but she's sweeping. It is home. It is no longer a refugee house or camp, and she's so thankful. Home at last. And with God, it should be possible.
Oh, we may tear our clothes, and we are working hard and tear our skin even as we clear this land, but we're going to have oranges here, and we're going to have a garden, and we're going to grow cotton and peanuts. Oh, we are going to make it. We are. The determination is strong, and the faith in God is there, because they say it again and again, Gott kann. Yes, indeed, God can.